Thanks, everyone, for continuing on to the second portion of our Western Connecticut UFO Conference. We are continuing with the Reverend Michael Carter with questions and answer period. So as opposed to, the Old Testament, a question that we have here is, how do you view Jesus and the New Testament fitting into all of this, what you've spoken about?
Okay, I believe, and there are many stories about, I think there's some stories in Buddhist literature or what have you, about the hybrid, or today we would call them an indigo child, where they are advanced, more sensitive, having more psychic abilities, having a higher IQ, that type of thing. I view Jesus as one of many saints or avatars that have come to show us a different way to live. But if your mom, not a but, and if your mom is not human and your daddy is, then that means you're not fully human. We see that with Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mother, who was Miriam's cousin.
How we go on it?
We see that with Samson. His mother's name is not even mentioned, I don't think, but an angel comes to visit. That's what we see. The angel comes to visit. And that's what I was trying to allude to, maybe not as articulately in the Old Testament, that some of these beings came and gave us good news. Some of them came to help us. If we look at Daniel, when he's in the lion's den, a being comes. He's called an angel. The thing about being an angel is they never tell you what they look like, and they never tell you where they're from. But the angel comes and saves him from the jaws of the angry lions. And so I look at Jesus, who's not the first, but since we're talking in Western culture, but again, we look at his cousin John, we look at Abraham and Sarah, who were from Mesopotamia, so they probably knew more about the Mesopotamian sky people as well. But I look at Jesus as a hybrid. He calls his father, God Father. I mean, he calls him Father, Abba, in Hebrew. If you read the Palladian accounts about the story of Jesus, who they call Emmanuel, his father is Gabriel, but there's also an intelligence that is overarching. In other words, there's God, and then there's an overarching, they're gods and then an overarching intelligence. So I think Jesus fits that pantheon as an indigo child who comes in with a message, with a mission. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. If you look at his birth, you see that we know that stars don't go across the sky and shine lights down on mangers. If they did, the whole gravitational pull of the earth would be disrupted. You want to talk about tidal waves and calamities. It's also interesting that it's more Buddhist in a way, that these people from the East, they knew the scriptures, they knew the prophecies, and they come. And they do that with Buddhists, right? You have these monks, they go find out, they're saying, well, this person may be born Aurelio, the child Aurelio may be born here. Let us go visit the child. Let's take these things with us. If he picks them up, then, from another life, then we know it's the same. This goes on in Buddhism as well. So there's an interesting kind of overlay there. But that is where I think Jesus comes in as a space person, basically, who is here to show us a different way. If you look in the New Testament, he says this about 7 times. words. He says, Yahweh tells you this. And some of this, Paul, is what I wanted to talk about when we do our show in more depth. He says, because Jesus is not really worshiping Yahweh. He's never mentioned in the text. His Father is a loving God. His Father is a compassionate, forgiving God. You don't see that with Yahweh. And he never mentions Yahweh, but he says about the law of Moses, because Moses was a Yahwist, that Moses told you this, but I tell you this. In other words, we got a new thing coming on now. Moses says this, I tell you that. The only time he hints at Yahweh is there's a story where the Sadducees and the other Sanhedrin and what have you, they're debating with Jesus. And they say, you don't know us. Our father is Moses. And Jesus says, because they're talking about Yahweh, and he says, your father was a liar from the beginning and always was. And he says, what kind of father, if their children asked them for food, would give them a stone? What type of father, if their children asked them for food, would give them a serpent? And if you go to Exodus, and it's also in Leviticus, the Jews are wandering. The manna is really not doing. There's not even a word for manna in Hebrew. It literally means we don't know what it is. They don't know what they were eating, but Yahweh was giving them this, and they were running around and going around, and they were saying, look, we need something else. And they go to Moses, and they say to Moses, go to Yahweh and tell him that we need something. Yahweh loses it. He sends them a stone. He says, there, you can get your food from there. And then he sends them serpents who bite some of the people, who kill them, who make them ill. And then when they complain, then he gives them a staff. He gives Moses a staff, which is a serpent on it, which is another name for a reptilian. And he says, tell them to stare at this, and this will heal them. Which is interesting because remember, Yahweh doesn't want any graven images. So Jesus is saying about Yahweh, what kind of God would do that? What kind of father would do that? Jesus knew the scriptures. So he was referring back to that story. And he's talking about a very different kind of entity. Someone said, who am I praying to? Well, that's who you need to know. I can't tell you who you're praying to. Again, that's the beauty of this. It makes you for yourself come to say, who and what is it that I believe in? Without the church, without the synagogue, without the mosque telling you, you find out who God is on your own. Rather than, I can't tell you who you're praying to, only you know who you're praying to. I can tell you that you may want to revisit who you're praying to. You also want to check out that any God that's out there is in you as well.
Is there a common purpose amongst the beings that that have visited you, and maybe that common purpose is also in line with
I don't know if there's a common purpose. Again, I go back to this council. They call it the heavenly host or the divine council, and if we use our words, we say it's a galactic council. I would say that no, they're not all with a common purpose. The ones that visited me, I don't know. I was not hurt by them. But again, if we go to Hayam Ashad, and if we go to Jacques Vallée, and we go to, there is a group of extraterrestrials that the governments of the world are in touch with. Some of them have our interest at heart. Some of them say, no, we don't want disclosure. These beings are not ready. We can just use the earth for her resources. And there's some who say, let's see where this experiment is going to go. I think when Eisenhower made his treaty, the Greater Treaty, back in '54, I would not want to have to make that decision. He had to weigh what treaties, how would Earth be in this configuration of all these other beings? Because remember, some Greys came to visit him and some Nordic. And what was on the table partly was nuclear fission. Need to dial it back. He said he couldn't do that, that we weren't ready for that. So there's a group, so that when people get angry at NASA and say, why can't they just tell us? Because they're probably treaties that you and I don't even know about that have to be adhered to. But the good news is that Chaim Mashed, if he's right, and I happen to believe he is, he's telling the truth, that around that table, there are some extraterrestrials who are working for our benefit. If you go back and look at the nuclear meltdown on reactor 4 at Chernobyl, if you remember it, the mass media was there. There was a ship hovering over reactor 4. Reactor 4, for some reason, did not melt down. If it had, we would have lost a third of Europe. Okay? So whoever was in that ship must be an ally of ours. That's the way I'm looking at it. There's somebody around that council that says, let's see where this is going to go. So they're different beings with different agendas. Again, if you go back and read your Bible, you will see that. If you go back and read Alil and Enki in the Mesopotamian and Sumerian text, if you go look at the Mesoamerican text with Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, there are some beings who are for us, and there are some beings who just look at us as an inconvenience. And that, I believe, is to this day.
Is there anything that you want to add, Paul?
Well, I just wanted to, excuse me, mention that as a fellow seminary grad, I often get the question, well, as a religious person, is it okay to believe in ETs and UFOs and all this other stuff? And I often say it depends on the religion. So maybe Michael can share some of his views on that.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I say yes. Of course you can. How can you not? Number one. Yeah, we live in a populated universe. We always have. We always have. And so I don't think that takes away from religion. I mean, I think most of our religions were started, intentionally or not, because of it. Because of it. You have a lot of people out here who really worship UFOs. They worship extraterrestrials. They give them all the reverence and what have you that they would give a god. I'm not one of those people, but I say yes. Now, there's some religions that will adapt, like Hinduism. They believe in multiple deities. The Catholic Church will do fine, and they've been kind of in the mix forever. Buddhism, Christianity, as we know it, will have a hard time, as we know it, because this wasn't, there were many ways to be Christian, just like there were many ways, Judaism was polytheistic. And one of the things that Christianity will have to wrestle with, did Jesus die for the reptilians? Did Jesus die for their sins? Did he die for the Nordics? Did he die for the praying mantis? Right? Did he die for the Arcturians? Those are the questions. Are these beings so advanced they don't even deal with sin? Is this like superstition to them? That's going to be the doctrine, or the reptilians. That's going to be the doctrinal question. That's going to be tough. Did he die for the Nordic? That's going to be the tough question. Is Jesus God? Is Jesus God? We were arguing about that before, not, religion. Was he God in human form, or was he human? Did God enter him? I mean, it's a mess. But the other religions may not have to wrestle with those kind of theological questions. The Vatican in 2009, when Pope Benedict XVI, one of the most conservative popes in my lifetime, if you recall, he came out and said that we should not be surprised about extraterrestrials because they were in the Bible. Now, it raised my eyebrow because just 400 years ago, we would be put to death for talking about this. We'd be put to death. And I was like, wow, what? Pope Benedict? Francis has made some comments that they're our brothers and sisters. In other words, don't worry about it, gang. God's just been busier than we thought. And there are other people out here. So I was shocked. But they know. They both know.
Another question for you, Reverend Michael. Do the praying mantis insects that we see here on Earth, do you think they are related to the alien species?
I think they are. I think they're one of the races. I think if you look at Bob Stone, who talks about all the alien races that he had encountered in his crash retrieval program with the United States military. Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
Okay.
We also have to remember, though, that there are beings who can travel around who don't need ships. When I read that passage to you, I mean, it doesn't say if the person needed a ship, but they didn't call it an angel. They didn't call he or she. But they just said, the Spirit said, I will go and put a lying tongue into this prophet, which goes to show you again, some of these people mean you well, and some of them don't. This brother here or sister here who told Yahweh, I'll go do it, they were involved in someone else's foreign policy. They were Yahweh wanted to fight, and they were setting this up. That we call that today a false flag operation. That's what we call it. And they were doing that back then. See, they didn't have the words to describe what we describe. Okay, you look at Ezekiel. Ezekiel talks about being picked up by the Ruach, which is translated wind, breath, and being able to travel through the sky. Okay, he was in Iraq, what we call Iraq. He tells us what it looked like. He tells it what it was made of, what kind of wheels it had. Joseph Bloomer, the details are so precise. Okay, it was in 1974, NASA has a patent on the wheels that Ezekiel said he saw on this craft. He was a NASA engineer at the time. It's called the omnidirectional wheel. So if you want to translate Ruach, Yahweh, as spirit, you're going to have a problem, because he was talking about a craft, probably talking about the wind that it kicked up. But my thing is this: if you translate Ruach as the Spirit of God, how can NASA have a patent on the Spirit of God. NASA has a patent on ancient technology described in great detail. The patent number is US 378-99478. It was obtained February 5th, 1974. It's still used by NASA to this day. So for those people who say this is just sci-fi and, you know, Paul asked the question, I'm sorry, his son asked the question, the technology is right there. It's just that they were trying to describe it, and so they couldn't describe it. So they used the words of their day. But that's the Spirit of God. And it's a patent on it.
Another question, Reverend Michael. It seems that we've had more hybrids and more angel visits back then, not now. Why is that the case?
I think that we may have more now that we just don't know about. But also, now we know how to shoot you down. Now we know how to use microwave weapons and jam your radar and things like that. So, you know, back then you got a stick in your hand and a spear. You come and go as you please. Besides, you had already carved up the earth. And you already, as Genesis told us, and as we see in the book of Enoch, you came down here and you made love to the women and you created a hybrid race, giants. You can't do that so easily now. But there are a lot of people. What's the case in Italy, where these human-looking extraterrestrials have befriended these Italian, I forget the case, for the last 20, 30 years. And of course, they're human-looking extraterrestrials that work with the military, covert operations. This is all going on. The only thing, as I say again, is that the same things that are going on now, this hybridization program, it was going on back then. They just called it something else. And it goes on now. And what it does, as the person who wrote, and I get it, I hope I wasn't too flippant when you're asking who you pray to. I don't know who you pray to, but already now you're thinking, what is God? What does that mean to me? Is it a man up in the sky, a white man up in the sky that's like Santa Claus? He punishes me if I'm naughty and rewards me if I'm not. Is it an energy? See, it's got you thinking. And that's when you come to your beliefs, you'll come to them because you worked them out on your own. Not some pope, not some minister, not some guru. You'll come to it on your own. There are clues in the Bible of a greater reality. Plato talks about it, and he talks about a lot of things. If you go back and read Timaeus or Critias, he talks about a third race of people. He talks about male, female, and there was a race that was like both. He talked about every 5,000 years there was some type of cataclysm, and that every 5,000 years, and that humanity had to start all over, and that these beings would come and assist. So it's right there in plain sight, but we've been taught not to look at it. And so for people who, a lot of people said, I can't believe in that anymore. I can't believe in that anymore. Yeah, you can't believe in it anymore. I'm talking about with the Old Testament, at least, because the Old Testament is about an angry, wrathful extraterrestrial who was allotted, like all of them were, places of the earth. He got Palestine. And usually when you got a piece of land, you got the people on it. And so the people are aligned with these different gods, and they're fighting each other because they're siding with these gods. And that's what's going on all through the Old Testament.
It kind of
And
reminds me.
that was
It,
going on.
it reminds me again of when the whole Area 51 Bob Lazar thing was coming out at the end of the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And he actually produced a video about his experience going into the science and what the craft was, what he was trying to work on, reverse engineer at S4 inside of Area 51. But one of the things that they would do, the people in charge, was to give them briefings. Sometimes they would have them sit in a room with these sort of files. And one of the interesting things that he said was that these beings were coming here for tens of thousands of years and were manipulating the DNA of humans. And they've done this about over 60 times.
Yeah.
That's something that
Yes.
he couldn't corroborate because it was something that he read. And he's like, okay, I can't, really, validate this because this is something that I'm reading here in this room in S4 inside of Area 51, but I can totally tell you that what I'm working on is real because I've touched it, but this is what they're telling me where, these beings who produce this craft have been doing here for tens of thousands of years.
And I'm saying, yes, I agree. And it's right there in the Bible. It's right there in our narratives. If you go read, like I said, in South Africa, if you go read in the North, in Scandinavia, if you go read in Japanese, if you go read everywhere, there's always these beings who come down from the sky and they created us. And they come back and they tweak. And they go, this has been going on. That's a hybridization program. That's what that's called in our language. And some of them were upgrades. Some of them weren't. If you read the Mayan Popol Vuh, I forget the names of the two extraterrestrials, but they came down and they created us, but we were getting too smart. Okay? We didn't want to just be slaves. We didn't want. So what they did was they created a mist. And then when they flew over the earth, they sprayed that mist and it dumbed us down. Now, we have words for that today, right? They didn't have words for that back then. So you're trying to figure out, well, what are they talking about? Well, you may say, oh my God, that sounds like some sci-fi. That couldn't be it. But that's what they're talking about. And these beings were saying they're getting too many of them. How long should they live? In Genesis, you're not going to live a long time anymore after she ate the apple. You're going to live, you're only allotted this much time. They were trying to control the experiment. And it's shocking. Because if you got this thing of a God up there and whatever, you got to rethink all of that. And so it's shocking. It is shocking what I'm telling you. You got to rethink the whole thing.
Yeah. Another question from one of our participants is, what are your thoughts on the Vatican and the whole UFO ET phenomenon? Have they been more accepting?
I think they have. I think they have, and I'm not Catholic. I mean, I love the ritual. I love the Jesuits. I love all that. I don't like the theology, but they have been more open. I just mentioned Benedict, what he said in 2009. Pope Francis has made some statements. And they're sticking to the guns. They're saying that you should not be surprised because they're all in the Bible. These beings. I don't know any other denomination that's saying that. The only person I knew that was saying that when I was coming along he's retired now, was Dr. Barry Downing. Back in '68, he wrote a book called The Bible and Flying Saucers. Morris K. Jessup wrote a book about it. He died under mysterious circumstances in the 50s. A woman by the name, a clergy by the name of Virginia Brasington, right down here in the South where I am, North Carolina, she wrote a book about it. But you can count them on, Cynthia Turnage, who was more of a Zechariah Sitchin disciple. She went through it. She wasn't a clergy person. But I don't know too many ministers that are coming out talking about it. But the Catholic Church has been, whatever you think about them, they have been open about this. Yes, I do think we're being observed from the moon. I also believe that when I go back to him, but there are others. Hiram Akkad said that we are in contact with the Galactic Council, that covert governments. And so there, yeah, the moon, he says that we have bases on Mars. Why would he lie? Why would he lie? 28 years. Israeli defense of space defense minister. Why would he lie? Galactic Council. There's other people. Do you remember this guy? Hold on. His name was McKinnon. Well, let's not forget Brother Paul Heyer, who died, the former defense minister of Canada. Says that all the governments of the world, the military and clandestine governments, that we're in contact with off-world intelligences. They didn't lock him up. They didn't medicate him. And you know he had to have a clearance to say that. And then we talk about, here's one, Gary McKinnon. On his own, he managed to hack into NASA's computers, and he came across images and texts revealing that we have communication between U.S. intelligence and extraterrestrials. The U.S. wanted to extradite him, now remember, because he was in Britain in 2002, and they wanted to lock him up for the rest of his life. Great Britain said, that's not going to happen. Not only that, Great Britain passed an amendment to change the law between Britain and the U.S. regarding extraditions in order to protect him. But no mention was ever made of what he found. No probe was done. Christopher Mellon, he's been pushing this. Talked about the USS Nimitz and the Tic Tac. So this is disclosure, ladies and gentlemen. This is disclosure. It may not be the way you want it, but these people are saying that we've been for 70 plus years, we have known about this. And they're doing it drip, 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 and you can see why. Because they probably have some other treaties and stuff going on. That's number one. And number two is then they got to come up with, we had to kill some people to keep this secret. Nobody wants to be the first to say that. But they can always say, if someone goes out here and takes a picture of one of these, and now we just don't see a craft, now we see a being, and they can't control that, they can always say, but don't you remember? We couldn't give it all to you. We were trying to protect you, but we told you about this. We told you about this. And they'd be right. They'd be right. Because we're looking for disclosure in a blue box, and the universe has been sending it in a pink box. This is disclosure. When Jacques Vallée, when Brother Grush, when Iyad Hassim comes out, when Paul Hellyer comes out, when Elizondo comes, I don't know, what other way do you want it? That's disclosure.
What do you think, if there's enough evidence that comes out, will that change all religions here on
Yes,
Earth?
it'll have to. It'll have to. But it won't have to change them drastically. Like I said, Christianity is going to have to wrestle with some stuff. But these other religions who already have multiple deities, or they don't have a problem with God and then these lesser gods or what have you. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. Western Christianity, as we know it, is going to have to do some shapeshifting, because it's one God, and this is the only way to believe, and he died. Now, they may have to find out that Christianity may be just a religion for earthlings, because maybe other places didn't have that or even don't believe in all that. If you read some Palladian literature from Adamski, or especially Billy Meyer stuff, they are fiercely anti-religion because they see the damage that it can be done. But yeah, some people will have more to tweak than others. But what it will do is force you to live it, as opposed to just reading these laws, which is what Yahweh wanted to do. The Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments weren't for everybody. Ten Commandments, it was like 16 or 13 or 613. Paul, what was it, 620? Anyway, it was, and they got it down to 10, but that was only for the Jewish people. You didn't go sleep with your Jewish neighbor's wife. You didn't covet your Jewish neighbor's property. You didn't murder your Jewish neighbor. Because if that wasn't true, then why go into the land of Canaan and kill men, women, and children? That's what Yahweh had them do. That wasn't for all of us. That was for Yahweh's tribe.
Does anyone have any questions for Reverend Michael Carter? Because we're about 20 minutes left in this special presentation with questions and answers. Actually, we do have one. All of these different ET factions with their different agendas regarding Earth, are they expecting or waiting for us as a species to pick a side amongst them? Or there is no side?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a side, but again, there's some who want us out of the way because we're too angry and warlike and we're not intelligent. And there's some that say, let's see where this is going to lead. And as I was saying at the top of the hour, the last hour, for me, I'm not saying that you have to think like this, but what I am saying is I always ask, well, who's around that table? If there is this galactic council, who's representing us? But I use the Chernobyl incident as an example when the ship was seen there and at reactor 4 and it did not melt down. That means somebody is saying, let's help these folk out. Let's see where this is going to go. And then there's some who just say they're not ready and they may never be ready. And it goes all the way back. When I went to the Old Testament, when you go look at Asherah and Dagon, and I forget the other, those were beings that are venerated. Now, they have different names. For instance, Asherah is Venus in the Greek pantheon. And I forget her name would be in Egyptian. But she was like the Mother Earth. All the figurines you see in these archaeological sites, and it's always the woman. See, because we got rid of the female. And you know, she's voluptuous, so it's always a picture of the vulva, and she's got these big breasts. That's Asherah. That's Asherah. She's in the Bible. And she helped the people. Dagon helped the people. That's why Yahweh was angry, and go read Jeremiah, because they built these altars to them. And remember, the people wanted, the people in charge wanted one God, one temple. So there's one financial center, right? And there's that one religion, like we do today. They weren't that different from us today. It was power. It was about power. It was about power.
Let me ask you this. This is already bringing me some ideas already. What's happening with these congressional hearings? Some of these senators and representatives, they're not sure of who these beings are. And some of them have said, I don't know if you've heard this, what if they're demons? What if they're like something evil? It's like, you know, something satanic, because it goes against what I've read in my Bible or what I believe in. So some of them are thinking that, you know, there's a holy war going on, and they're pretty much like, oh, let's attack them because then the second coming will happen.
Yeah. That type of Christian nationalism. Yeah. You're right. That happens. That's happening now. You see, again, you look in the Pentagon. There's some people who want disclosure and some don't. Right? There's some ETs who want disclosure and some don't. There's always this push-pull. We give them a little bit of disclosure and then we bring it back. We give them a little bit and we bring it back. But that's the thing. That's what's so insidious about. First of all, it's controlling. We're going to force Jesus to come back if that's what you believe. We're going to make this battle of Armageddon happen. We're going to make these prophecies come true. That's scary. And the people who die in between, the civilian Palestinians, the civilian Israelis, whatever, they're just collateral damage. We don't care about that because we want to make this happen. That is very scary. And you're right. There's some, even Hector Elizondo talked about that there was some evangelical energy in our people, in our military, and in upper echelons of government. They are evangelical. And so this is demonic. And that's scary that they have that kind of power and can force that kind of narrative. But then there's some who say, let's wait and see. The ones that we're interacting with may not be. So that's all the intrigue that's going on. And Paul, if we ever do the show, I'll go into more depth with the Bible verses and all that. But for me, this was new because I thought I was just doing well by saying, yes, there are extraterrestrials in the Bible. Okay, but that wasn't good enough, because now you got to say, well, what does that mean? It certainly has something to do with the wars and stuff that we're having today. Because if you worship a God who's vengeful, then you gotta explain vengeance. If you worship a God who will wipe out an entire people because they're angry, that's the God you worship, then you have to make apologies. You have to say, you have to justify that now. And this is all because of a mistranslation, and because King Josiah, not the only ones, everybody, they were trying to do the best they could, and Josiah, but they were doing it to consolidate power. They were just like there's one God, okay, one, clergy level with priest and high priest and what have you, and then there's the people. Rome came along in 325. Now we're going to make this official. And what did they do? Up here, we're going to have the emperor and the god. Then we're going to have the senators. And then down here, we're going to have the soldiers. Then we're going to have priests and the common people. And this has been going on since Mesopotamian times. Again, they ruled. The extraterrestrials ruled. Then they had their offspring ruled, had hybrids. Then when they left the planet, and remember, there were different ones coming every so often, but when they left the planet, they appointed, Michael, you're a minister, you do this, you do that, y'all do this, and you do our will. We'll be out here, but we'll still be telling you what to do for foreign policy and whatever. And so if I'm not spiritually evolved, I'm going to be corrupt, because that's what they did. They ruled with an iron fist. They ruled by fear. So that's how I'm going to rule. And then you get what we have today. And then until people wake up, they did wake up. They did get rid of Yahweh. If you go back, hold on, they got rid of Yahweh. They said, we want a human. We want a human king. And then they got Saul. Then they got Saul. If you start reading the book of Samuel, you'll see they got rid of Yahweh. And Yahweh said, okay, you can get rid of me, but don't come to me if you need me. But they got rid of him and they got Saul. So people came together. And they got rid of Yahweh. They fired Yahweh. They said, we don't want to live like this. And they're telling us to beware of who you give your power to. And just know that there's always a hidden hand. That's the way I see it, because they wanted us to have a better human experience. That's what they wanted. And they wanted us to know that there were beings here who were for us and some who weren't. That's why they weren't monotheistic, because there were other beings who were coming and helping.
Now, do you think that we have a question here. The Greys have said that God is just not as we know it. What do you think is God in the universe?
I don't know. And I love that. Not because I said it, but the finite can never comprehend the infinite. Any God that you know is not God. It's a mystery. The Lakota, They call God Wonka Tonkin, the great mystery. See, in the West, we're afraid to live with mystery. We have to know the answer. I don't know. I do know that I can tap into whatever that energy is when I pray and when I meditate. I know that energy flows through me, but I don't know. And at 66 years young, I'm okay with it. There's some things you don't have to know, you can just line up with. But and if I know, you can always tell people who, and I'm not talking about this question, but you know, you can always know when people make God in their image, because God hates the same people you hate. I don't know what that God is. I know that there's something greater than me. And if I'm still enough, and if I put my ego aside and I'm quiet, I can feel it. And I know that I come from it. And I know I'll go back to it. But that's all I need to know. But I know it's not anthropomorphic. I know it doesn't have arms and legs and anger and all. I know, no. So the short answer is I don't know. I just know that I'm part of it.
What do you think?
I'm okay.
What do you think if, say, they're visiting us and they're messing around with our DNA and they're, this hybridization program? Do you think, again, going back to Bob Lazar, they consider us as vessels? Now, going a step further, are these vessels for DNA, or are we vessels for the spirit? And if that's the spirit, what if we are reincarnated and this earthly plane is a plane to the next?
Well, there are about 4 questions there. So I'm going to try to address I don't think all of them think we're just empty vessels. But if they know that we're so caught up in the physical, but know that there's life after life, then yeah, we would be vessels. In the sense of when I die, I've met people who have died and come back, then they say, this is there, Michael, I'm outside of this, I'm still conscious, so this is like a vessel. That's number 1. Number 2 is we have to be careful because we don't want to say they, because there's so many here that they have different agendas and maybe different philosophies about life. Number 3 is all major religions talked about reincarnation until they were edited out, Christianity included. Life is continuous. This is why Eckhart Tolle reminds us that the opposite of how does he put it? The opposite of life is not death, because life is eternal. The opposite of life is birth, because life never ends. This is what Einstein tells us when he says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it only can be transformed. This is what Chief Seattle says when he says there is no death, only a change of worlds. They know this. They know that, especially if some of them created us.
We're about 7 minutes until we're going to end this wonderful presentation with the Reverend Michael Carter. Is there any other questions our audience can ask him?
There's one about the breastplates. If you go into Exodus, it'll tell you what they're made of. They're crystals. And some of them are very thick because they have layers to put on, because they're going into the temple and it's radiation. So that's why very careful with how the priests, they put on their breastplates. But a lot of those they say, and those are stones, those are crystals. You can Google it. But they're around radiation, the priests. And so they're using the words that they can describe what's going on. And it's to keep them from, glowing in the dark.
And it also reminds me of where they say that the Ark of the Covenant is located in Ethiopia, and they have a person who is the caretaker of the Ark, and they all get glaucoma for being so close. Only one person is allowed to be close to the Ark of the Covenant, and whoever it is, that priest they get glaucoma, their eyes go white and everything. So that kind of reminds me that, there's some sort of radiation with.
Yeah, because it's a communication device, and they got the copper, and they got all that. We know this is the device, but yeah. Well, remember the story? Oh my God, when some of them get boils and they fall off, that sounds like radiation poisoning.
Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
they didn't know that, so they said the Lord was angry. But it's really you touch if you touch the ark and you fall over dead, the Lord is angry. Maybe you touched an open electrical current. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have the nomenclature, the vocabulary, but we have it now.
We have it, but we still can't describe some of the, what we see, or even what, like folks who have worked on reverse technology on, these craft, they still don't know how these things work or operate.
Right.
They put them,
Right.
from what I heard, is they work on it for a little bit and then they put them away for like another 10 years and they catch up, with technology. Maybe they learn a little bit more and then they find some things out, especially with our physics, because the physics that we have right
Do you
now.
think we will see free
There
energy
are-
technology system?
Hold on a second. There are some people who say that the physics, Einstein's physics, some of it is incorrect. It's just there's a miscalculation in some of his.
Well, remember,
theories.
we've got 21st century physics. They're working on 70th century physics.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got 21st century. They're doing 70th century, 60th century physics. Do I think there'll be free energy? I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but I think it will happen. But I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime. And that's to say, if I live to be 30 years, I'll be what, 90, 96. I don't know. But you know what? On today, 10/22/2023, I'm going to say yeah. It may not be widespread, but I'm going to say yeah.
Wouldn't that be something that would change?
It
that,
would.
change the planet?
It would be great, but I think the holdup is money. I think the holdup is, a lot of people don't want us to have all this knowledge from them because we, cancer research, there's a lot of money goes into that. But these beings probably have the way to secure a lot of these things. We won't need gasoline or oil. That's going to take a lot of money out of a lot of people's pockets. And last but not least, when you look one of these beings in the eye, you get it that, this is so much bigger than being a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or blue state, red state, or an American or German. You're like a galactic citizen. But if you start thinking like that, or if all of us start thinking like that, you become dangerous because you can't be controlled. And as long as I got you thinking he's black and you're not, she's trans and you're not, he's gay and as long as I got you thinking like that, I can control you. But once you start saying, you know what, we're really, really, really do come from the same source, and all this other stuff is kind of BS, you're dangerous. And leaders who get you to do that are dangerous because now you can't be controlled. That's why we don't want an educated populace. We don't want to put money to education. You try to get some money for a school, universal health care, well, where's that money coming from? I need to bomb somebody. I need some military stuff. Well, how much you need? I got the check right here. An educated populace is dangerous. When you go into another country and you take it over, what do you do after you get settled? You kill all the intellectuals. You get rid of all the educators because you don't want that because they're going to start trouble. You get rid of those religious leaders, especially the ones, the Gandhis, the Kings, the Jesuses. You got to get rid of that. They're going to make your life miserable. So there's a lot riding on non-disclosure. Right now, we talk about, yes, they are listening. Right now, we talk about, You notice where the conversation is? Tech, weapons, tech, threats, security. They're not talking about religion. They're not talking about spirituality. They're thinking, how can we go there and still be in control? They don't want to touch that yet. They're thinking about it, but they're not touching it. Right now, they've reduced it to technology and weapons. But I'm telling you that this whole phenomenon is about spirituality.
That's a very, very good point, and we're going to leave it there. It is time to actually end this. Thank you so much, Reverend Michael Carter, for joining us today for the beginning of our Western Connecticut UFO Conference, and my heartfelt thanks to Paul and Ben Eno with their wonderful show.
Yes, yes.
And
Yes.
we send healing energy and positive vibrations to our brother Paul, and and also to everyone here who may be in turmoil, whether spiritually or physically. And until tomorrow night, please tune in. Until then, I thank you all, and until next time, have a good evening. Actually, a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. We'll do it
Bye-bye.
again.